What's wild about this isn't just the idea of a luxury yacht and a sudden fallout. The real issue is what it exposes when the future king decides the optics have finally gone too far. Because when Prince William steps in and effectively draws a hard line around Camilla's presence in certain circles, it stops looking like a family disagreement and starts looking like a quiet assertion of control over the image of the monarchy itself. People can argue about the details of any yacht story. They can debate how much is exaggeration and how much is genuine institutional discomfort. But the deeper current is harder to ignore. A new generation is watching the old one, and it is deciding which associations still serve the crown and which ones quietly undermine it. If you've been following the slow recalibration inside the royal family, you already know these moments rarely stay private for long. Before we go further, make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss the next layer of this story as it continues to unfold. The palace does not issue press releases when power quietly shifts. The audience has to read the atmosphere, the absences, and the timing. The surface version is simple enough to retell. Reports began circulating that Camilla had been linked to a high-profile luxury yacht gathering that sat uncomfortably with the current mood of the monarchy. Not a quiet private sailing trip. Something more visible, more opulent, more connected to a world of wealth and leisure that the institution has spent years trying to distance itself from in public messaging. The photographs, the guest list, the timing, all of it landed at a moment when the royal family is supposed to be projecting restraint, continuity, and quiet service. Instead, the conversation turned to excess. And once that conversation started, the question became, who would absorb the cost of the optics? William did not need to make a dramatic public speech. That is not how these things usually work. What matters is the pattern that follows. Invitations that no longer arrive. Schedules that no longer overlap. Appearances that are quietly restructured so that certain combinations of people no longer share the same frame. When the future king begins to treat a particular association as a liability rather than an asset, the rest of the institution tends to notice. Staff notice, advisors notice, the people who manage the calendar notice, and the person on the receiving end of that recalibration feels it most of all. This is where the history starts to matter. Camilla's position has always carried a particular kind of tension. She entered the family as the woman many people once viewed as the disruption. Years of careful rehabilitation followed. Marriage to Charles, the gradual shift in public language, the eventual title of queen. All of it was the product of time, persistence, and a deliberate decision by the institution to close ranks around the second marriage. Yet the rehabilitation never fully erased the older narrative in some corners of public opinion. There has always been a residual sense that Camilla's place is secured by marriage rather than by bloodline, and that distinction still carries emotional weight inside the wider family story. William represents the other side of that equation. He is the product of the first marriage that ended in tragedy and global scrutiny. He is the heir who grew up under the shadow of that history. He is also the one now positioning himself as the modern steward of the monarchy's future reputation. Duty, in his framing, is not just about showing up. It is about protecting the long-term credibility of the institution against anything that looks like unnecessary risk. When a story about luxury and leisure attaches itself to a senior royal, William's instinct is rarely to shrug it off. His instinct is to contain it. That containment is what the phrase "takes charge" really points to. It is not about a single shouting match or a formal eviction from a palace. It is about the quiet machinery of influence. Who is included in key family events? Who is given space in the narrative of continuity? Who is allowed to remain highly visible while the institution tries to project a leaner, more focused image? When William decides that a particular association is becoming costly, The practical effect can look a lot like sidelining. The calendar changes. The joint appearances thin out. The protective circle tightens around the core bloodline figures, and the people judged essential to the next chapter. The yacht element adds a specific kind of sting because of what yachts have come to symbolize in modern public culture. They are not neutral. They are floating statements of extreme wealth, of detachment from ordinary constraint, of a lifestyle that most people will never touch. For a monarchy that has spent recent years trying to emphasize service, environmental messaging, and a more approachable tone, any visible connection to that world is radioactive. The institution has already absorbed enough criticism about privilege. It does not need fresh material that hands critics an easy visual. So when the story attached itself to Camilla, the question inside the family was never only, is this fair? The question was also, can we afford the association right now? Look at the contrast this creates. Charles has spent decades building a life with Camilla and integrating her into the public face of the monarchy. His loyalty is personal as well as institutional. William's loyalty is shaped by a different timeline and a different set of pressures. He is thinking about the decades ahead, about the children who will inherit the scrutiny, about the need to keep the monarchy feeling relevant rather than residual. Those two orientations can coexist for long periods. Then a moment arrives that forces a choice between personal continuity and institutional risk management. The yacht story appears to have been one of those moments. People who watch the family closely will recognize the pattern. There have been other episodes where William has shown a preference for tighter control over the public narrative. The careful management of his own household. The emphasis on work and visible duty over pure ceremony. The reluctance to let secondary storylines distract from the central project of preparing the next generation. Camilla, in this framing, becomes less a central pillar and more a figure whose visibility needs careful calibration. That is a painful shift for anyone who has spent years earning their place. It is also a revealing one for anyone trying to understand where the real power is migrating. The emotional layer is harder to quantify, but impossible to ignore. For Camilla, the experience of being gradually repositioned after so much effort to secure acceptance carries a particular kind of vulnerability. She is not a blood princess. She is not the mother of the future king. Her legitimacy has always depended on the support of the institution and the personal commitment of the king. When that support appears to thin under pressure from the next generation, the old insecurities can surface again. For William, the calculation is colder and more strategic. Protect the brand. Protect the children's inheritance of a stable institution. Do not allow secondary controversies to define the early years of the next reign. This is the part that most casual observers miss. The story is not primarily about one yacht or one weekend. It is about who gets to decide the acceptable boundaries of royal association in the years ahead. Charles still holds the formal position. William is increasingly the one shaping the atmosphere around it. That dual reality creates friction. It also creates opportunities for quiet realignment. When the heir begins to treat certain connections as optional rather than essential, the rest of the system adjusts. The adjustment does not always require public confrontation, it only requires consistency over time. Consider the wider context of recent years. The monarchy has already absorbed the departure of Harry and Meghan, the ongoing management of Andrew's situation, and the constant pressure to justify its cost and relevance. Every new controversy is measured against that accumulated strain. Luxury optics land harder now than they might have 15 years ago. The public tolerance for visible excess is thinner. The media environment is faster and more ruthless. In that climate, William's instinct to draw lines makes institutional sense even if it creates personal strain. The symbolism of kicking out is therefore more atmospheric than literal. It is the experience of finding doors that used to open more readily now require more justification. It is the experience of discovering that joint public moments are no longer being scheduled with the same frequency. It is the experience of sensing that the protective instinct of the heir is directed more toward the core line of succession than toward the blended family narrative that Charles worked hard to establish. That shift does not erase Camilla's title or her marriage. It does change the temperature around her role. Loyalty inside this family has never been simple. Bloodline loyalty and marriage loyalty can pull in different directions. Duty to the institution and duty to a spouse can produce competing priorities. William's generation appears more willing to prioritize the institutional brand over the personal accommodations of the previous one. That does not make him cold. It makes him a product of the scrutiny he grew up under. He watched the cost of uncontrolled narrative. He is determined not to repeat certain patterns. The future stakes are clear enough. If William continues to consolidate influence over the public presentation of the family, the monarchy that emerges under his eventual leadership will look leaner and more tightly managed. Figures who do not sit at the center of the bloodline succession may find their visibility reduced. The emphasis will stay on the working core and the next generation. Camilla's place in that picture becomes more ceremonial and less operational. That is a significant evolution from the years when the institution invested heavily in normalizing her presence at the center of the story. None of this means the personal relationships are finished. Families of this complexity rarely resolve tension in neat public chapters. What it does mean is that the balance of influence is moving. The heir is no longer simply waiting. He is shaping the environment he will inherit. And when that shaping involves drawing a firmer line around associations judged to carry unnecessary risk, the people on the other side of the line feel the distance immediately. The unresolved question is how Charles responds to the quiet recalibration. Does he absorb the pressure and adjust the family's public rhythms accordingly? Does he push back in private to protect the partnership he has defended for decades? Or does the institution simply allow the next generation's preferences to set the new normal without open conflict? History suggests the last option is the most common. Palaces prefer managed evolution to public rupture. The cost of that preference is often paid in the quieter erosion of someone's sense of full belonging. What makes the Yacht story potent is not that it invents a new conflict, it crystallizes an existing one. It gives a concrete image to a longer process of prioritization. Image versus loyalty. Continuity versus risk management. Marriage and access versus bloodline centrality. Those tensions have been present for years. A single high-visibility episode simply forced them into sharper focus. Viewers who have followed the family through earlier chapters will recognize the pattern of gradual repositioning. It rarely announces itself with a formal statement. It arrives through absences, through changed guest lists, through the careful choreography of who stands where and who is no longer required in the frame. The people inside the system understand the language of those absences better than any outsider. The rest of us are left reading the temperature and the timing. The monarchy's long-term survival has always depended on its ability to adapt without appearing to break. William's approach seems to favor tighter control and clearer hierarchies of relevance. Camilla's story, in this chapter, becomes a test case for how far that approach will go. If the institution can quietly reduce the visibility of a figure who once required so much public rehabilitation, it reveals something important about the hierarchy of needs inside the modern royal project. Belonging is not the same as centrality. Titles are not the same as influence. Marriage can secure a place without guaranteeing permanent weight in the operational story. That distinction is the real revelation. The Yacht episode provided the occasion. The deeper movement is the heir, asserting a more selective vision of what the monarchy should look like in public. Whether that vision ultimately strengthens the institution or creates new private fractures is a question that will only be answered over time. For now, the atmosphere has shifted. the line has been drawn more firmly, and the people watching from the outside are left to decide what kind of monarchy they are actually witnessing in the making. The tension has not vanished. It has simply gone quieter, which is often how these stories continue. The public sees fewer shared frames. The private conversations continue behind the walls, and the question of who truly sets the tone for the next era remains live. What do you think this moment really signals about the balance of power inside the family right now? Does William's firmer stance protect the future of the crown, or does it risk deepening the very fractures the institution has spent years trying to manage? The comments are open,